Back here in the final segment of our program as we talk about banking and finance in our country, and we wanted to zero in on this business of, well, Aaliyah brought it up, the ease of doing business, Mr. Bo. We've been hearing about this for years now, and a whole lot of Bahamians believe that it's not easy to do business. As a matter of fact, there's more frustration people feel in doing business in the Bahamas.
And I think we have to be honest with ourselves, and that's the truth. That, you know, we can't say that things are better when the average person doesn't feel it. And so how do we shift that pendulum, or how do we move the pendulum? I think we very often have seen it as being an us versus them, meaning what is government doing to make it easier, and then what is the private sector doing to make it easier, and then the individual who is trying to do business is seeing themselves as not being a part of that equation. So it is sitting down and saying, well, what is it that we lack? So Aaliyah alluded to something that's very critical. The rules of engagement just seem to be missing in a lot of the areas, a lot of them, I'm going to say government related in terms of approvals and processes. But that's the difficulty in terms of ease of doing business. If the rules of engagement are known, then you have an ability to address them. When we look at what is sitting on the ease of doing chart in terms of how we are graded, you have the elements like paying taxes, but you also have the ability to get construction approvals. You also have the ability to get your electricity turned on. You have elements of talking about insolvency, how easy it is to pay taxes. A lot of those are public sector elements that we need to get right, that says, to your point, that regulation does not mean strangulation. It doesn't mean that I frustrate you to the point that you don't do it anymore, and that's a well-regulated jurisdiction. What it means is that I understand the principle of what I'm trying to protect, and then I put in place a system and processes to allow you to do so in a manner that allows me to efficiently do it. But our mindset, because when we look at some of the legacy persons who do so, is to your point. They say, well, if I make this process more efficient, am I actually ending my own job? As opposed to saying, well, if I upskill myself and learn how to operate the technology. You know, Henry Ford said, why didn't he completely automate his factories? It's because he said, who would buy the cars? So the reality is employment will always exist, but you have to accommodate by becoming, you know, the ones who are going to be the new pioneers, not the ones who are just doing things the old way.
Mr. Stewart, a practical situation, you know, a person would have an account in a particular bank and they want to open another account in the same bank. They are asked to bring documents that your bank or other banks should have on file.
That's correct. I mean, we should have those on file. So if you're being told to do that, that's not an accurate depiction of how our bank operates. If we have the data already on you, we should be able to transfer that data. And again, to lend that ease of doing business support. Like, you should not be able to have to bring, now if things are expired, I can get that. I understand, like, maybe, you know, there's some expired documents as required by our regulator too that we may have to update. But if they're already there and they're intact, you should not need a second set of documents.
Okay. Let's talk about access to capital, and all of you can chime in on this particular one. There are a whole lot of people who believe that they are being frustrated by archaic policies and of banks, and they want to do things in the Bahamas, but the demands of banks, there are so many. Young people want to buy land, for instance, and they are being asked to produce a down payment, for instance, that is sometimes just unreal.
Well, so I'll start with that. I mean,
Yes.
At the end of the day, the bank, we're stewards of capital, correct? We take your deposits, everyone's deposits, and we house that, and it's our basically mandate to give you some sort of return on that, depending on which structure you choose. But we have to also protect that. So if you're not going to have equity or skin in the game, why should I just finance your entire dream? I need something in return. So we will ask for a down payment. That's on the individual
Oh
side.
yes, no, but down payment, no problem with the down payment. It's the question, quantum, the amount of down payment. I mean, you know, a young person would like to buy land for $100,000. It seems to me that if they put $10,000 down, they should be able to get a loan from your bank or any bank.
Well, that's not necessarily the case. Again, we through the last crisis, for example, we found ourselves being less of a bank and more in the real estate business. We had such a large overhang of delinquent assets. To give you a depiction of that, we had more delinquent assets than the entire country of Canada, not on a percentage basis, on an absolute basis. That's going to force you to rethink. Aliyah said, coming out of crisis mode, you sort of make knee-jerk reactionary moves. That could probably swing you on the other end of the continuum. Maybe in the financial services, we suffer from that. So when we came out of that large overhang, larger than Canada itself, as this small country with 300, 400,000 to 30 million, we had to make some adjustments. One of those were, we want to see a larger down payment, because if you can put enough of a down payment in, that's more equity out of your pocket, and you're going to walk away from that asset much less than you were if you had 10,000 and 100,000, correct? So that's how we sort of look at it on a risk-based approach, to protect your capital and also to protect yourself, the investor.
And I would say this, that we often, again, villainize what is an institution versus understanding what is the construct. So Greg started very rightly. All the bank has done is take the depositor. So when that young person calls you frustrated, then he should say to you, well, Mr. Jones, are you prepared to lend it to me? Because you have a deposit in the bank. If the bank that you've chosen to put your money in for safekeeping is being inflexible, then I can bypass the bank, because all the bank has done is taken Mr. Jones, Aliyah's, Brian's, Greg's, and Gowan's money together so they could lend persons in order to do so. If you are finding the institution is inflexible, the persons who put the money in can come out of it. Now, when they do that, they need to have vehicles in order to be able to then pool that capital in a different way. And that's the issue that we have in the country. Our banking system, and just only one historical element I would say that we speak about in terms of banks, we were never venture fund or venture capital institutions. We were traditional institutions that were effectively community banks, monies being placed, pooled and lent, so it was risk averse. It was not with the mindset that based on the profit I make, I am saying to my shareholder and my depositors, I'm going to hold a portion of that back to be more risk-taking and hope that of the 10 that I finance, the 2 that are successful will pay for the 10 and allow me to do others. So it wasn't how it was set up, and that's where we have to do as a nation to say, well, how do we use technology now to say the platforms, crowdfunding we hear about all the time, the small and medium-sized market capital structures that exist. How do we get a platform that says to the individual that may have 10,000 in the bank, that says, you know, me lending a single individual 10,000 is tremendous risk, because, you know, if that person doesn't pay me, so it's one-to-one. But if I put it into a vehicle that says it's not just my money, it's others, and then I have proper professional advisors that are running it, it is lending to certain persons, but I've diversified the risk. And so I think we often immediately turn to saying, well, what is the bank doing? And I always say this, me and you have this argument or this conversation all the time. The bank is only acting on your behalf. So if you don't like what I'm doing, you can change it by your behavior, because you will move your money.
But Mr. Vo, you know, Mr. Stewart, since you're on the commercial side, it seems as though banks in the Bahamas are more risk averse than ever before. You know, I understand that, you know, things have changed. But in order to move this economy forward, you know, the liquidity that you have in your bank is not going to do you any good unless you're able to grow it, right?
Well, that's why I said, but it's your liquidity, it's not mine. And that's where I'll go back and say this much. When we say we're risk averse, we have very short memories. That's the good fortune of our Bahamian society. When banking institutions had tremendous losses coming out of the economic recession, now not like they had in North America and Europe, because we didn't have the ninjas, we didn't have the no-income jobs, asset-type loans, and nobody owned it. It was a hot potato. We didn't have that reckless behavior. But when losses were being recorded by banks across the industry, were persons who deposited money prepared to say, you know what, we wanted you to take that risk, and so the loss, therefore, we will absorb. So even though I deposited $1,000, you could give me back $999 because I recognize that that was just a national loss. The mindset isn't like that. I put in 1,000, you better give me back 1,000 plus. Then we look at the shareholder and we villainize again. Okay, the international banks, because they're big guys and they could take this. They've been making profit in our country. Who owns them? The same type of individuals who own our Bahamian banks. And so when you say to a shareholder, take the loss, then look to your parents who've saved their money and decided to invest, and are you prepared to say to them, take the loss because I want to take more risk? It is saying that let us get into structures that allow us to knowingly put our money at risk. If you as an individual are saying, I want to take more risk than the traditional institutions are doing, where are the alternate institutions for me to put my money there because I know it's going to be higher risk, but hopefully it's higher return.
That's the key right there, frankly, is we can't expect that sort of risk-taking approach from commercial banks. But there are alternative funding structures. And we have, fortunately in the Bahamas, we have many creative structures for raising capital. We just need to have, more thought needs to be given to how we deploy their assets that are here. There's lots of assets that are here and assets internationally that you can access. It's not just the Bahamas. You aren't limited necessarily. Now, of course, we won't get into exchange control, perhaps. That's probably for another discussion. But certainly, I think we have to look at developing a framework for alternative financing.
Absolutely.
Well, you probably would have to talk about exchange control because when you're talking about the kinds of things that Brian is involved in, eh?
Brian will talk about exchange control.
I mean, I want to pick up on this whole conversation about capital, really, and the flow of capital within our economy, right? Really just kind of emphasizing what Gwan said. There's a basic fact about the source of capital, right? There's only one of them, and it's savings, right? That's the only source of capital you can find in any economy, right? But we do a very poor job of moving that capital around. Okay, so we look at the banks and we say, okay, the capital is in the banks, right? Because that's where people have their savings accounts. So we look for the banks to release that capital, but it's not their role to release that capital, right? It's up to the account holders to this point. So I totally agree with what you said. Why does the money just sit there? Or why does it just end up in real estate? It's for lack of a better option, okay? To put it very bluntly, we have a dysfunctional capital market system in the sense that we have a stock exchange that has no liquidity. Right? I shouldn't say no liquidity, but it's very low level of liquidity to the sense that, to the extent that you can't really rely on price discovery in our market to determine fair value, right? So it's really how much is somebody willing to sell for or how much they're willing to buy, but that doesn't depict, what the true value of that stock is, you see? So it's very dysfunctional. So we've seen the Securities Commission discuss plans to bring forth crowdfunding rules to further democratize access to capital, right? This is what we've seen lead to, tremendous developments, new startups, entrepreneurship, finally being able to unlock the potential, that we see. One thing in the Bahamas, we're smart, we're talented, right? We operate on a world scale, okay? But we don't develop that talent to the extent that we need to because of lack of resources, right? And it's not because it's not here. We're not pooling them correctly, right? So for example, just think about Silicon Valley, right? Everyone thinks about all these unicorns, billion-dollar startups that kind of come out of there. That is a community, right? That was designed to be that way, okay? This didn't just happen overnight. Of course, there's a few unique factors, right? You had like a couple universities in a certain area and a couple, computer companies, whatever. The fact of the matter is the town, city of San Francisco and so on, they passed SBA legislation, Small Business Act, right? Mm-hmm. They basically created an entire environment that de-risks and incentivize those who had the capital to go ahead and put that capital to work, right? Those are kind of policies we don't have here, right? We have very opaque policies as it relates to foreign capital coming in. We don't know by what standards we can even, say, set up an international fund, attract capital to come in. What is going to be the criteria? If that was very clear, we would have funds that are designed to attract foreign capital to be invested in our local economy. Now, kind of let's just stay on the local side for a moment though, right? I made a comment earlier that, the only way we're going to turn our economy around is through entrepreneurship. But the few initiatives that have been taken to start releasing some of the capital, it's in our country. I just say they've been found wanting, right? It came, what they say, a few days late and a dollar short. That's pretty much the situation, because while we see there's a huge demand for business capital, those who actually have viable opportunities are being either underfunded or simply not funded at all, let alone being able to thrive.
As we seek to put a cap on things here today, let's begin from this side with Mr. Bowe telling us, in order for us to grow in the financial services sector in the 21st century, in this part of the 21st century, what needs to be done? The same question for everybody.
Yeah. I'll just say we have to drop our fear of the unknown and fear on the outside. That we have been successful, and it may have been due to ignorance or naivety, because we didn't know we should be fearful. And that's how our forefathers really built what we have today. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to almost adopt that mindset again, that we go into it like children, where they are not afraid to try anything. Mm-hmm. And they learn by bucking their toe, and we can't be afraid to buck our toe. I think we've become too complacent. We want to do the same things in the way that we've always known it and hope that it has a better result, and we need to start doing things differently.
Mrs. Stewart?
I would say, look, see the disruption that's coming about right now from technology and fintechs and the other asset classes that are coming up as an opportunity. Don't think that banking or any form of capital housing or capital investing is going to stay traditional. It's going to be fast changing, and technology is going to be the one to drive that. And I know Brian can talk about this, but that crypto space, for example, while Scotia's not involved in that at all, but that's a very interesting space that's going to evolve very rapidly, just like the web did back in the 90s. So I would say embrace the technology. Don't see this as disruption, but see it more as an opportunity, not a threat.
Brian?
Absolutely, I would agree with that. And I think, I think we need to collaborate more amongst ourselves. We need to cooperate, form strategic alliances so that our financial services sector becomes much more sustainable, right? I think we need to move as one, speak with one voice. And, in that vein, right, we need to also embrace the future, the changes that are coming, right? You look historically, all we've seen is change. We've seen super cycles of change and then, just lulling periods of change. We're now in one of those super cycles again, right? Where things are going to speed up. So I think for the first time, perhaps we can look out 5 years from now, see where we want to be, and start doing that right now.
Alan?
I think we need to simplify. And it sounds counterintuitive because so much is coming at us. I think that we need to get back to, as Gowan said, the childlike basics and simplification in all aspects, whether that's removing duplicative processes in the Bahamas that make it difficult to do business here, whether it's focusing the message that we give to the global community. I think we need to focus on what that message is. It needs to be simple, clear, and easily understood. And it needs to be a whole industry effort.
Thank you so very much. We wish to thank you all for being here today. This has been very enlightening, and I'm sure our public would be better educated as a result of all the things that you had to say today. So thank you, Mr. Bowe, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Jones, and Ms. Allen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching and listening to our program today. Good evening, everyone.